was the quiet, unmarried cousin living in a tiny apartment, working as a librarian. At my cousin's lavish wedding, my uncle bellowed a toast to all the successful people in the room, pointedly adding, "And to those of us still figuring it out," his eyes landing on me. My aunt laughed and asked if my cat could be my +1 to the next event. The table erupted. That night, I applied for my first business loan. 15 years later, as the keynote speaker at a national charity gala sponsored by my foundation, I saw them seated at the back table, waiting for a word. Hello. Welcome to Hurt Stories. There is a particular brand of cruelty that is reserved for families. It's not the cruelty of strangers, which is often random and unfeeling. No, family cruelty is intimate. It's surgical. It's delivered with a smile, wrapped in the familiar language of inside jokes and shared history, and it lands with the precision of a scalpel because the wielder knows exactly where to cut. They have the blueprint to your soul. They know your insecurities, your soft spots, the unfulfilled dreams you whispered once as a child. And in moments of tribal gathering, they sometimes use that blueprint not to build you up, but to gently, publicly remind you of your designated place in the hierarchy. I was the family ghost, present but not fully alive, tolerated but not celebrated, a cautionary tale whispered in the form of a living woman. My family, the Fontaines, were and are a clan of loud, acquisitive, status-obsessed people. They measured worth in carats, square footage, and titles after your name. My father's brother, my Uncle Roger, was the patriarch of this particular circus. A blustering, self-made, and never let you forget it, owner of a chain of auto parts stores, he presided over the family like a king holding court, his opinions delivered as edicts. My cousins were all variations on a theme: sleek real estate agents, tense corporate lawyers, a plastic surgeon whose wife's face was a testament to his skills and her lack of them. And then there was me, Serena, the daughter of my father, Roger's quieter, less successful brother who had passed away too young. I was a librarian, a curator of special collections at a small, prestigious but underfunded university. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment filled with books and a very dignified rescue cat named Fitzgerald. I was unmarried, childless, and by their metrics, utterly, completely, and fascinatingly unsuccessful. The event was my cousin Jessica's wedding. Jessica, the plastic surgeon's daughter, was marrying a hedge fund analyst. It was a spectacle held at a country club that smelled of money and freshly cut grass. I wore a simple navy silk dress I'd saved for. It was elegant, but in a sea of garish, label-flaunting gowns, it looked plain. I was seated at table 12, the family overflow table at the back, near the kitchen doors, with the elderly aunts and the disgruntled teenagers. The humiliation didn't come all at once. It was a slow drip feed of pointed comments. My cousin Mark, the lawyer, asked me loudly, "So Serena, still living in that shoebox in the city, must be cozy." His wife tittered. My Aunt Patricia, Roger's wife, peered at me over her champagne flute. "You look peaky, dear. All those dusty books can't be good for your complexion or your prospects." I smiled tightly, the way you do when you're trying to turn your skin to stone. Then came the toasts. Roger stood up, his bulk straining his tuxedo, a microphone in his hand. He toasted the bride and groom, their dynamic union, their boundless future. Then he swept his gaze across the room. "I want to toast this whole family," he boomed. "We are a family of doers, of winners. Look around. We've got doctors, lawyers, captains of industry." He paused, his eyes scanning, and then they landed with a theatrical twinkle right on me. "And of course, we've got those of us who are still figuring it out. The late bloomers, the dreamers. Here's to them too, may they find their path someday." The room erupted in knowing, rippling laughter. My face burned. I could feel every pair of eyes at my table, and from tables far closer, locking onto my scarlet skin. I was a living punchline. But it was my Aunt Patricia who delivered the coup de grace. As the laughter subsided, she leaned across the floral centerpiece, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Don't worry, Serena. We'll always save a seat for you. And maybe next time you can bring that cat of yours as your plus one. He's your main man after all." This time, the laughter was a roar. It was the release they'd been waiting for. The weird, bookish spinster aunt and her cat. The tableau was complete. I was fully, definitively categorized. A figure of fun, a relic. I didn't cry, I didn't run. I sat perfectly still until the laughter died down and the band started up. I danced one obligatory dance with a confused elderly uncle, and then I left. I drove back to my city, to my quiet apartment, Fitzgerald weaving around my ankles. The silence there wasn't lonely anymore. It was sacred. It was the silence before the storm. That night, I didn't weep into my pillow. I sat at my small wooden desk, a single lamp pooling light on a blank legal pad. The heat of my humiliation had cooled into a hard, diamond-sharp focus. Their laughter wasn't just an insult. It was a diagnosis. They saw me as someone without a path, without value, without power. And in that moment, I realized the source of my true power. They had no idea who I was. You see, being a curator of special collections isn't just about shelving old books. It's about understanding narratives. It's about recognizing undervalued assets. It's about preservation and context. For years, as a side passion, I had been building a digital archive and blog focused on the literature of solace. Forgotten works by women, by marginalized voices, by those who wrote about loss, resilience, and quiet joy outside the mainstream canon. It had a small, devoted following. It made no money, but it had something priceless, a community and a unique, curated intellectual property. That night, I saw the bridge between my world and theirs. They valued only what glittered. I knew the value of what lasted. I drafted a business plan, not for a bookstore, but for a hybrid. A digital archive subscription service paired with a luxury, limited edition press. We would find forgotten literary gems, secure the rights, often for pennies, as no one else saw their value, beautifully restore and digitize them for scholars, and simultaneously publish exquisite, hand-bound, artisanal physical editions for collectors. It was a niche no one occupied, bridging academic rigor with objet d'art luxury. I called it the Verity Press and Archive. The next morning, I applied for a small business loan. I was denied. I used my meager savings. I reached out to my community, the scholars, the bibliophiles, the quiet souls who loved my blog. I started a crowdfunding campaign, not with a plea, but with a manifesto about preserving unseen beauty. It funded in 48 hours. My first project was a forgotten series of botanical essays and poems by a 19th-century female naturalist. The digital archive went live. We printed 500 hand-bound copies with pressed flowers on the covers. They sold out in a week. For 10 years, I worked in the trenches. I didn't attend a single family event. I sent polite regrets. My life was my work. I learned about printing, distribution, intellectual property law, marketing to a luxury audience. I made mistakes. I nearly failed. But slowly, Verity grew. It became the secret darling of a certain set: university libraries, private collectors, celebrities with intellectual pretensions who wanted something unique on their shelves. Our editions began to be featured in design magazines. We won awards for preservation and for book design. The turning point came when a legendary, reclusive author, whose early work we had resurrected, named Verity as the literary executor of her estate. It was a seismic vote of confidence. Overnight, we went from a niche press to a major cultural player. The financial offers flooded in. I didn't sell. I partnered with a prestigious museum to create a permanent endowment for literary preservation, funded by Verity's profits. 15 years after the wedding, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at the annual Luminescence Gala, the premier fundraising event for literacy and the arts, sponsored by the Verity Foundation. It was black tie, held at the museum's Great Hall. The guest list was a who's who of actual culture, not just money. Pulitzer winners, Nobel laureates, visionary artists, philanthropists who cared about legacy, not just tax write-offs. I knew they would come. The Fontaines had an unerring nose for the seat of power, even if they didn't understand the culture. They would have seen my name on the invitation, on the sponsor listings. They would have bought a table, not out of support, but out of a desperate, clawing need to be near the new source of family, prestige, they couldn't comprehend. I walked onto the stage that night in a column of simple, breathtaking black velvet. My hair was silver now, and I wore it down. No jewelry except my mother's pearls. The spotlight found me. I looked out at a sea of faces, and there, at a table far in the back, near the service entrance, a poetic symmetry that was not lost on me, was the Fontaine clan. Uncle Roger, shrunken somehow, in a tuxedo that now seemed to wear him. Aunt Patricia, straining to see, her face a mask of bewildered avarice. My cousins, looking uncomfortable in a room where their usual boasts of square footage and car models would garner only polite, blank stares. I gave my speech. I spoke about the power of unseen stories, about the courage of quiet voices, about how value is not declared but discovered with patience and care. I never looked at their table, but every word was a stone laid on the path between that wedding table and this stage. After the speech, as the crowd rose in a standing ovation, I was swept into a whirl of conversation with the museum director, a famous novelist, a tech CEO who was an ardent collector. I was the sun, and they were the planets. And then I felt a presence hovering at the edge of my orbit. I turned. It was Uncle Roger. He was holding a glass of champagne, his hand trembling slightly. "Serena," he said, his booming voice reduced to a raspy whisper. That was quite something. "Thank you, Uncle Roger," I said, my voice calm, warm even, but with a distance that spanned 15 years and a chasm of lived experience. He floundered. "We're all so proud. Your father would be stunned." It was the closest he would ever come to an apology. Aunt Patricia materialized beside him, clutching her clutch like a life preserver. "Darling, you look expensive," she blurted out, her old programming short-circuiting. I smiled. "It's velvet, quite old, actually." I didn't explain it was a vintage find, that its value was in its history and cut, not its label. They stood there waiting, for an invitation to my circle, for a photo op, for a crumb of reflected glory, for forgiveness. I looked at them, these architects of my old shame, now rendered small and confused in a world whose rules I had written. The humiliation they had inflicted had been the fire that burned away everything false, everything that sought external validation. It left only the pure, hardened core of my own purpose. "It was lovely to see you both," I said, my tone gentle but final, the tone you use with pleasant acquaintances. "Please enjoy the rest of the gala." I then turned back to the museum director, seamlessly re-entering a conversation about Baroque art. I didn't look back. I didn't return powerful to gloat. I returned powerful to occupy the space I was always meant to inhabit, a space they were too blind to see. Their humiliation was a gift. It was the match that lit the forge. And from that heat, I didn't forge a sword to wield against them. I forged a key to a room they could never enter, filled with a wealth they could never understand. The last laugh wasn't a sound. It was the profound, echoing silence of their irrelevance in the world I had built. They had tried to define my worth at a cheap tablecloth. Years later, they could only beg for a definition of it from a distance, as I stood on a stage of my own making. Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more story like this, please like the video and subscribe the channel. Hit the bell icon to get notified.